At a whisker under 500,000 ringgit, the Jaguar I-Pace, their all-electric SUV, may not necessarily seem like good value. But then again, value has never really been the game for Jaguar. Instead, for the money, what they intend to offer is an elevated driving experience, an elevated ownership experience, an elevated experience of living with a luxury car. So, with a 90 kilowatt-hour battery, a claimed range of 470 kilometers, 400 PS, and 696 Newton meters of torque, is the Jaguar I-Pace a true Jaguar, just without the growl? Well, in this video, we'll find out. My name is AIMAN ABDULLAH. This is MalaysianMotoring. This is our review of the Jaguar I-Pace. Now, for a few basic stats before we get into it. The Jaguar I-Pace is available in Malaysia in two grades. We have this, which is the HSE400, or you can get the Black Edition, which is the same statistically, but it's just slightly lower on the range. And so that comes in at about 460,000 ringgit. Both cars as standard run a 90 kilowatt-hour battery, powering two motors, one on each axle, producing 400 PS and 696 Newton meters of torque. The 0 to 100 time is just under 5 seconds, while charging can be completed via an 11 kilowatt AC charger or via a 100 kilowatt DC charger. With an 11 kilowatt charger, it'll take about 8 to 10 hours, if I'm not mistaken, to fully charge, whereas with a DC charger, 10 to 80% takes about 30 to 40 minutes. Now, we're talking about standard specification on the I-Pace. You also get things like these full LED headlights replete with adaptive high beam technology. You also get the dynamic indicators front and rear. You also get these relatively large alloy wheels, a variety of different colors for the exterior, and again, there are very few options with the I-Pace. Now, mercifully, Jaguar Land Rover Malaysia, together with their distributor partner Sime Darby Motors, have specified these vehicles in a way that they believe best and most accurately reflects Malaysian desires, and so there's no need for too many options. However, if you are particularly well-heeled and you want a slightly different I-Pace, I'm sure Jaguar Land Rover is more than happy to accommodate. Now, rolling stock on both of the I-Pace models in Malaysia are standard, so they run 20-inch alloy wheels in this design, but for the HSE400 you get a diamond cut face, whereas on the Black Edition it is all black. What is also standard is, of course, this very swoopy roofline. Now, the I-Pace has been tested and refined for better aerodynamics, which is why you'll find that the grille actually cuts up with a little scoop in the bonnet in order to improve airflow. That's why you also get the deployable door handles, as well as a low-profile roof spoiler that pushes air over the rear windscreen, therefore negating the need for a rear windscreen wiper. That's also why the back end, if you see from this angle, seems to cut off very abruptly, again, to allow the car a slightly more slippery dynamic. You may also notice that this car does ride a little bit high. The I-Pace comes as standard with air suspension. This is the normal ride height, although there's also an access mode which brings it a little bit lower, which I think does look a little bit better. And you can also access an off-road mode which improves overall ride height and, of course, ground clearance, although I doubt very much you'll be taking your I-Pace off-road. Now, what you cannot see from this angle is the full panoramic roof, which in this particular model is tinted to hell, which means that visibility is not that great, but it does mean that you do cut out a lot, if not all, of the heat from entering the cabin. Although there is no sunscreen over it, you can live with it, which is why I think it is a luxury, but one that I appreciate in luxury cars like this. Now, the I-Pace that we get in Malaysia is actually a facelift model, which is why we get slightly different tail lights with a slightly more subtle light design all the way around. Although from this angle, this is where you can see, as I mentioned, that low-profile roof spoiler, the beautiful curved rear windscreen, and again, that very pert rear end. Underneath, you will find a lot of aerodynamic trickery, again, to help the car smooth the air as it cuts through. Now, one of the things I appreciate about this car is the fact that the badging is quite well thought out. You have the big Jaguar leaper in the middle, and the badges on either side are far enough so it doesn't look overly complicated. This cannot be said of several other electric vehicles in the market, and in fact several other ICE vehicles in the market, which have too many badges in too many places. Now, one of the things that this car does not have is a kick to open function, which I think some people do use, but the majority don't. Now, accessing the boot can be done via a little button down here, there we go. And you will find a pretty decent amount of space back here. Now, it is worth noting that the rear seats do fold 40-20-40, so you have added practicality. You do have a little bit of underfloor storage, just enough to fit a cable. There is some elastic bands on that side. You have some hooks, as well as a 12-volt socket should you need to plug in a Hoover. Now, this may not necessarily be the largest rear end that you can find on an electric vehicle, particularly an electric SUV at this price point. The BMW iX, for example, does offer a little bit more in terms of rear cargo space. However, the Jaguar I-Pace does offer a little bit more practicality in the front, where you have a front boot, which is big enough for the standard 3-pin charger only. Now, remember what I said earlier about Jaguar offering a more elevated experience behind the wheel? Well, that's certainly where it comes true in here. Because while the I-Pace offers a very intimate and very cozy cabin, what I appreciate is the attention to detail. All the buttons and all the switches have a very confident, very well-engineered feel to them, be it on the steering wheel or even here in the center console. These AC controls here, these knobs, do multiple things. You push them to adjust the standard fit heated and ventilated seats, you pull them to adjust the fan speed, and you turn them to adjust everything else, wherever that might be displayed on the screens that sit within the dials. You also get a touch screen here in order to control the HVAC system, which admittedly I would have preferred knobs and buttons, but at least these are always here, which means after a while you do get used to them, although personally I just leave it in automatic. Now, this center tunnel, since there is no transmission, does mean that there is a little bit more space. So there is a wireless charger here, there is a pass-through here if you want faster access to your phone. There's a little space here, which is great for putting touch and goes and card holders. There are a couple of very large cup holders here with little rubber bladders to hold everything in place. There is a large center console here with a USB-A, USB-C and a 12-volt socket. You get a decently large cubby over here, and overall practicality is pretty well sorted. Oh, and you have door bins on the doors, naturally. The highlight of this cabin to me is in terms of the presentation as well as the seats. So on the presentation of things, the Pivi Pro system here, which also runs the standard fit digital instrument cluster here, as well as the heads-up display up ahead of me, all look really great and they navigate very satisfyingly as well. All the graphics feel very well put together. Everything has a very lovely action to them. And even, again, using those HVAC dials earlier, when you push them, when you pull them, when you change the different settings, everything here has a nice, smooth animation to them. It's not necessary, but it's nice. The other thing that is not necessary but nice are these seats. Now, the HSE400 gets these standard fit sport seats, whereas the lower and black edition get the standard comfort seats. Now, these seats, while they look like racing buckets, and they certainly are shaped like them, replete with the integrated headrest, are actually incredibly comfortable. You have lumbar support, you have side bolster support, and of course everything is electrically adjustable. You can adjust your angle and height as per expected, and of course these two front seats have 3-stage memory functionality. And as I mentioned earlier, they are also heated and ventilated, which means you can get very comfortable. And the driving position, as it is in every Jaguar, is spot on perfect. This steering wheel can be adjusted both for reach and rake, although it has to be done manually, and everything just falls very easily to hand. All the controls that you need, be it to adjust the displays up here, to adjust your audio, or to adjust this car's standard fit level 2 semi-autonomy systems, are all here, and they are very easy to use. And of course, once you've come to terms with all of these things, you can then also enjoy some of this car's slightly neater features, such as the Meridian audio system, which comes with a surround sound functionality, which gives you a 3D representation of sound, which admittedly in this car is bloody amazing. Now, the benefit of those sport seats are not just for the driver and front passenger, but also for the rear passengers. These seats are very thin. And as a result, with this seat setup in my driving position, I have absolutely acres of knee room. And because the bases are also not very thick, it does mean that I can tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, which means I can get very comfortable back here indeed. These seat squabs are very nicely sculpted, and they are long enough to provide adequate under-thigh support. I have 2 USB-C ports back here, as well as a 12-volt socket, and should I so want to, these 2 outer seats can also be heated. although I doubt very much anyone will be using that here. Sat back here, however, given that the hip point is a little bit higher than the seats in front, I get an excellent view out and I get to really appreciate that panoramic sunroof, which I think in this car I certainly appreciate given that this is a majority black interior. It doesn't help that these windows are also incredibly tinted. Now, the center passenger will not be all that comfortable because the side bolsters on the seat base for the outer seat does eat into this space a little bit. It's only about that wide, which means that it is relatively limited in terms of usability. But given that the majority of people will be using this car as a four-seater, they'll be able to enjoy the two cup holders here and the relatively wide center armrest. And sat here, there's two ISOFIX mounts naturally, but sat here as an adult passenger, it is a very nice place to be, aided on top of that with the side or pillar mounted aircon vents to blow air directly to my face rather than the more traditional and ubiquitous crotch coolers that you get in the middle. Overall, this is definitely a very nice interior. It is not necessarily as spacious as what you get from the BMW iX. That's definitely a larger car and it pays dividends, especially in the rear. But I think as far as space is concerned, that shouldn't be a concern in an I-Pace. The roof, for example, I know a lot of people may be concerned with that coupe-like roofline, but actually there is a pretty good amount of headroom in here too, which means honestly no one should be too concerned. And if you do need to reach for the grab handles, that is when you'll be able to appreciate the gorgeously soft Alcantara headliner. That said, the thing that differentiates a Jaguar from a Land Rover, or a Range Rover for that matter, is the way it drives. And given the fact that Jaguars have up until this point only made internal combustion vehicles, can the I-Pace, Jaguar's first EV and also its heaviest vehicle almost ever, still drive like a Jaguar should? And the short answer to that is, yes it does. The amazing thing about the I-Pace is that because of its rolling refinement as well as its excellent ride quality, it means that you do get a very Jaguar-like experience. So over potholes and imperfections in the road, the car just glides over it and makes it seem like it's really not that big of a deal. But because this car rides on air suspension, it does also mean that when you're driving on the motorway, or if you're driving a little bit more enthusiastically, the suspension chambers firm up in such a way that it provides excellent body control. Now, on the matter of refinement, Jaguar has really pulled out all the stops with this car. All windows, including the windscreen, are acoustic glass, which means they are two-piece laminated glass windows, which means that you get even less noise intrusion into the cabin. On top of that, because this car's very slippery shape, it does mean that there is generally not that much wind noise. Road noise from the Goodyear Eagle F1 asymmetrical tires are also pretty negligible as far as I'm concerned. I certainly have seen far worse from other EVs, not just the ones from China. So as far as I'm concerned, everything in here does feel about right. It is what you tend to expect from an electric vehicle, particularly something that pushes beyond the 400,000 ringgit mark. And in terms of dynamics, which is what I particularly enjoy about Jaguars, the I-Pace doesn't disappoint in the slightest. In fact, the way this car moves about is so beautifully fluid that it makes you wonder whether or not this is quite as heavy as it is, because it is quite heavy. But if you thread it through some nice B roads and so on, you will find that the I-Pace, like I said, moves with a certain fluidity to it, which makes it very easy and confidence-inspiring for the driver to be able to eke out the very best that the I-Pace has to offer. The throttle response, as in most EVs, is near immediate, and of course you do get 100% of the torque immediately. However, in terms of one-pedal driving, which is something that a lot of EV owners tend to talk about and hype up, the one-pedal driving in the I-Pace is slightly lackluster in the sense that it doesn't really come to a halt with the sort of predictability that you'd expect. Instead, as the car begins to creep to a much slower speed, the regen slowly starts backing off, which means I do find myself using the brakes in order to bring this car to a proper stop. But in terms of go, this car has no issues. As I mentioned earlier, 696 Newton meters of torque, which means the 0 to 100 sprint time is done far faster than you would ever need. And it does also mean that merging into traffic is a very easy affair. Now, talking about traffic, this car does come with level 2 semi-autonomy, which means it has lane keep assist, adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, and even a driver attention monitor. It is unfortunate this car only comes with a singular reverse camera, albeit one that can clean itself. I would have definitely preferred a 360 cam, particularly given the fact that the rearward visibility in this car is somewhat compromised, but I'll take what I can get. And going back to the ADAS system, when you're stuck in traffic, it is very easy for you to manipulate the system in order to get it to do the majority of the work for you, which means crawling through traffic, steering you in lane, and it does also do a pretty good job when you're cruising on the motorway at relatively high speeds. It doesn't make really weird and awkward adjustments. Instead, it just moves fluidly, smoothly, like a well-calibrated machine. Now, the thing about moving like a well-calibrated machine is that more often than not, you will want to keep moving. And that may be an area where the I-Pace is slightly disappointing. Now, with a 90 kilowatt hour battery, I would expect a vehicle like this to be able to offer about 550 kilometers WLTP, which means in the real world, maybe about 500. In fact, 450 would be nice, but instead this car claims to offer 470. Which is still pretty all right. The only trouble is that in the last few days I've had this car averaging 22 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, despite running it in eco mode constantly and using the smart climate to ensure that only the driver's seat is cooled when I'm the only one in the car. Despite that, this car is struggling to do about 400 kilometers on a single charge. More often than not, I will be made to find a charger at about 350 to 370 kilometers. That is rather disappointing, particularly given the fact that vehicles like the Hyundai Kona EV and even the BYD Atto 3 seem to do more kilometers with a smaller battery. On top of that, it is not like I have been driving like a hooligan. If I have been driving like a buck, then naturally, yes, I would expect the range to drop. But despite being considerate with the way I use it, I would certainly expect to see a little bit more range. Now, I find that particularly frustrating in this because compared to many other EVs, the I-Pace does seem to be set up quite nicely in order to drive longer distances. The seats are great, you've got a fantastic ADAS system, and it's very hushed and very quiet, which means you would want to be able to do miles and miles and miles in this, which you can't, because after about 300, you will be looking for a charger. Now, I say this is an issue only if you're driving long distance, because even 350 kilometers is more than enough if you're using this as a daily driver to just drive you from home to work and then work back to home. Particularly given the fact that you can charge this car at up to 11 kilowatts, which means if you charge it overnight, you will most certainly get all the juice you need to resume duties the following morning. It's just that with 300 kilometers, it would mean that if I want to travel from, say, KL to Penang, I will have to stop most likely in Ipoh or Tapa to recharge my car just a little bit in order to make it all the way there. And unlike brands like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and others, Jaguar Land Rover does not offer DC fast chargers at every location. So while their Ara Damansara outlet does come with a 90 kilowatt charger outside the showroom, which you have to pay for, the showroom in Penang, because of its heritage status, doesn't have a DC fast charger. So all things considered, it does mean that you will have to plan a little bit more. Driving south, of course, is no issue because there are chargers every 70 to 80 kilometers. But again, it's a little bit more planning than I'm necessarily used to. And that may be a particular bugbear for owners of the I-Pace, because Jaguar customers are people who are used to a certain degree of ease, particularly when it comes to dealing with their cars. Jaguar Land Rover has long set the standard for customer service and customer experience within the luxury segment. And so by not offering a DC fast charger at every location where owners can reliably use them and count upon them and depend on them when they're traveling, it does mean that, again, it requires a little bit more thought, which would be less of an issue to a BMW customer, I suspect. But given the fact that the I-Pace, judging by how consumers have been purchasing them, judging by owner data, the I-Pace is being used primarily as a second vehicle, which means if you have another vehicle like a Range Rover or like one customer, a Jaguar F-Pace, it does mean that when you are traveling long distance, just take the one that uses the petrified dinosaurs. So would I recommend the Jaguar I-Pace? As a second car, particularly one that you want to enjoy over the weekends, or one that you want to do the daily grind in, or one that you feel is the best way to enjoy a really fulfilling and engaging driving experience while using no petrol, then yes, the Jaguar I-Pace is very, very hard to beat. Although, if you're looking for a driver's EV, the BMW i4 offers more range, decent performance, and is significantly cheaper. If you're looking at this as a primary SUV, I ask that you consider also the BMW iX, because if you can get over its gormless face, it is a pretty well put together package that does offer a little bit more space. But if you want an EV that truly turns heads, one that you're not going to find parked in a line outside of the Pavilion Valet parking queue, or indeed find 3 or 4 of outside of your favorite 5-star hotel, and particularly one that turns heads quite like nothing else, then the Jaguar I-Pace really might be the EV for you. I've certainly enjoyed my time with it, and I'm sure that, all things considered, if you were looking at an I-Pace seriously as a second car, you'd enjoy your time with it too. In any case, that's been our review of the 2023 Jaguar I-Pace. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.